Imagine this for a moment. What if everything you've been told about love, about being soft, kind, and endlessly forgiving was actually setting you up to get hurt? What if your biggest strength, your open heart and willingness to forgive, was in fact the very thing making you vulnerable? That sounds harsh, right? But it's a truth that Niccolò Machiavelli, the legendary political strategist and thinker, understood centuries ago, and it's a truth that many people today still fail to grasp. In a world where vulnerability is often celebrated as courage, and emotional openness is seen as a sign of strength, Machiavelli offers a brutally honest perspective that cuts through the fluff. He says, love is dangerous. Love without limits is a liability. Today, we're going to unpack that radical idea. We'll explore why being cold-blooded isn't about being cruel or heartless. It's about being smart, strategic, and above all, protecting your emotional power. We'll walk through why loving too much can backfire, how emotional boundaries save you from betrayal and manipulation, and how you can embrace this mindset without losing your humanity. This video is not for the faint of heart. It's for those who want to understand the real dynamics of power in relationships. For those who want to stop being the doormat and start commanding respect, not through intimidation, but through unwavering self-control and emotional clarity. You might wonder, can you really be loving and cold-blooded at the same time? How do you balance warmth with boundaries? What does it actually mean to love strategically in today's messy, complicated social world? Stick around because we're going to break it all down with real examples, timeless wisdom, and actionable advice you can start using right now. If you're ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about love and power, and maybe start rewriting your own emotional rules, make sure to like this video. Share it with anyone who's tired of being taken for granted, and subscribe to the channel for more insights like this. And if you want to show extra love, hit the super thanks button. Every little bit helps me bring you the best content possible. All right, let's get into why Machiavelli believed that the cold-blooded thinker is the one who survives and thrives in love, family, friendships, and beyond. Trust me, once you see love through this lens, nothing will feel the same again. Love has been celebrated across cultures and centuries as the ultimate force, the glue that binds us together, the answer to our deepest longings, and the wellspring of meaning in life. From poetry to popular culture, from ancient texts to today's social media feeds, love is often portrayed as an invincible, even magical power. It is the beacon we chase, the thing that redeems us, heals wounds, and softens the hardest hearts. We're told to love deeply, to give endlessly, to be open and vulnerable, trusting that this will unlock doors, build bridges, and ultimately protect us from harm. Yet, as seductive and hopeful as this narrative is, history and human experience paint a far more complicated picture. Niccolò Machiavelli, the 16th century political philosopher best known for his ruthless pragmatism, offers a stark counterpoint. For Machiavelli, love is not an unalloyed virtue or a reliable shield. Instead, it is a double-edged sword, beautiful and necessary in its place, but also a vulnerability, a liability waiting to be exploited by those who know where to push. Machiavelli doesn't deny that love is powerful. In fact, he acknowledges its force, but he sees it through the cold, unflinching lens of strategy and survival. To him, love is like a door left unlocked in a fortress. It invites danger because it lowers defenses. It softens the mind and the heart in ways that can be fatal, especially in environments where power dynamics rule and self-preservation demands constant vigilance. Why is it that loving too much, or loving without boundaries, makes you susceptible to harm? The answer lies in what love does to our perception and behavior. When you love someone deeply, be it a family member, a close friend, or a romantic partner, your brain releases a flood of chemicals that reduce your ability to see their faults clearly. You begin to rationalize their mistakes, forgive offenses prematurely, and lower your guard. You start to assume that your loyalty will be reciprocated simply because it comes from a place of pure emotion. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias. But it is also an emotional necessity. Our hearts crave security and connection, so they gloss over red flags to preserve these bonds. The problem arises because the world around you is rarely as idealistic as your feelings. People are complicated, their motives mixed. Even those closest to you can betray your trust or use your kindness when it suits their interests. Machiavelli knew that enemies, strangers who openly oppose you, are less dangerous in some ways than those we love, precisely because the people we love gain comfort in our softness. Familiarity breeds not just affection, but also expectation and entitlement. Those near you begin to take your loyalty for granted. They assume you will forgive without question, tolerate behavior that would be unacceptable from outsiders, and never retaliate or set limits. Over time, this dynamic transforms love from a source of strength into a tool others wield against you. Not necessarily out of malice, but often simply because they learn that you won't enforce boundaries. They test your patience, poke at your limits, and when they find them lacking, they exploit them. The danger isn't just that they will hurt you, it's that you make it easy for them to do so. Your emotional openness becomes your Achilles heel. This insight is crucial in understanding why Machiavelli didn't advocate abandoning love altogether. Instead, he urged containing it, loving with a ceiling, a cost, a plan. In other words, love must come with conditions and clear boundaries. Without these, love becomes emotional exposure. And emotional exposure is the most dangerous position a person of power can be in. To be cold-blooded, in Machiavelli's terms, is not to be cruel or heartless, but to be aware. Aware of how people shift when they feel too comfortable, aware of the costs when you remove your filters, aware of the transformation of love into entitlement and ultimately vulnerability. Consider the all too common scenario of a parent who gives everything to a child, forgiving every misstep, shielding them from consequences. While born of love, this behavior can lead to the child developing a sense of entitlement, expecting unconditional support and exploiting the parent's softness. The parent, in turn, may end up feeling used, drained, and unappreciated. Machiavelli's wisdom here reminds us that even the deepest love requires limits, or else it sows the seeds of its own destruction. Another widely recognized example comes from romantic relationships, where one partner consistently compromises their needs and boundaries in the name of love. This partner may tolerate disrespect, infidelity, or manipulation because their love blinds them to the erosion of their self-worth. Over time, the dynamic becomes toxic, with love serving as a trap rather than a bond. Machiavelli's approach will be to love with precision, to care deeply, but not to allow oneself to be trampled on. The core of Machiavelli's argument is that where love begins, strategy ends. Love removes the filters that guard us, and in doing so, it leaves us exposed. If you depend solely on love to protect you, you are essentially handing over control to others. Those who understand this will exploit it mercilessly. Those who don't will suffer. This may sound cynical to some, but it is grounded in a hard-earned realism about human nature and relationships. The world isn't fair. People are not always noble, and emotions, no matter how beautiful, can cloud judgment and invite disaster. Machiavelli's warning is a call for balance, neither love without reason nor reason without love, but a blend that safeguards your power while allowing connection. Why does this matter so much today? Because in a society that often glorifies vulnerability and emotional openness without teaching the art of boundaries, many fall victim to emotional exhaustion, manipulation, and betrayal. We've been told to love harder, be more open, and never give up on people, often at the expense of our own mental health and agency. Machiavelli's lessons challenge this narrative. They ask us to reconsider. What if loving without limits is not noble, but dangerous? What if preserving your own power and self-respect is the true act of love? Ultimately, The goal of this perspective is to empower you to love without losing yourself, to build relationships where affection is balanced with respect, where giving does not equate to surrender, and where emotional generosity is matched by strategic self-protection. Machiavelli's message is not to harden your heart into stone, but to temper it into something resilient, a heart that loves with awareness, sets clear boundaries, and commands respect not through fear or cruelty, but through unwavering self-control. In a way, Machiavelli invites us to become the architects of our own emotional fortresses. We do not shut the gates to love. We build secure entrances with guards who ask, "Are you worthy to enter?" We do not let anyone wander freely in our inner sanctum without ongoing requalification. This vigilance may feel cold to outsiders, but it is a form of self-preservation that ultimately leads to healthier, more sustainable relationships. In practical terms, this means asking yourself hard questions. Am I loving because it serves my well-being and growth, or because I fear being alone or unlovable? Am I forgiving without limits because I believe in change, or because I'm afraid of conflict? Am I allowing people to cross my boundaries because I don't want to rock the boat, or because I'm unaware of the cost? Learning to love with a ceiling is challenging precisely because it goes against deeply ingrained cultural messages. It demands emotional maturity, self-discipline, and sometimes difficult conversations or painful distance. But the payoff is worth it. Freedom from exploitation, clarity in your relationships, and the power to give your love to those who truly deserve it. Machiavelli's insight transcends time because it speaks to a universal truth about human nature and power. Love, when wielded wisely, can be the greatest source of strength, but love without strategy is an invitation to chaos and ruin. By embracing this truth, you don't become less human, you become more whole, more in control, and ultimately more free. Love is one of those experiences that can lift us to unimaginable heights and, paradoxically, plunge us into some of our darkest lows. It is often celebrated as the ultimate virtue, the emotional cornerstone that binds people together. However, the reality is far more complex, and sometimes love becomes the very thing that blinds us, leading us to lose the clarity we need to protect ourselves. When love turns into blindness, it's no longer just an emotion. It becomes a dangerous vulnerability. When you love someone deeply, your mental filters that usually help you evaluate situations objectively begin to falter. You stop calculating risks because your emotions take over. This loss of rational judgment, this suspension of self-protective instinct, can be incredibly damaging. Love, in its purest and most passionate form, makes you vulnerable not only because you open your heart, but also because you stop guarding it effectively. You stop asking, is this healthy? Is this reciprocal? Is this fair? Instead, you simply give, forgive, and believe, often without limits. This is where soft-heartedness, though noble on the surface, becomes a point of weakness. Take, for example, the classic case of friendship. Imagine you have a friend who consistently borrows money but never pays you back. At first, you might lend because you trust them, because you love the connection, because you believe in their good intentions. Maybe you justify their delays, make excuses for their forgetfulness. But as time goes on, you begin to notice a pattern, and it's clear you're being taken advantage of. Yet, because your emotional investment is so strong, you continue to extend credit, fearing confrontation or the loss of that friendship. You're blind to your own boundaries because your love and loyalty cloud your judgment. The more you give, the more they expect. You soften, and they sharpen their advantage. This example isn't limited to friends. It's just as common in family relationships. Parents often love their children unconditionally, sometimes to the point of sacrificing their own well-being. Children, especially when young, naturally test boundaries, and some learn to exploit this love. It's not a question of malice, but of familiarity and expectation. The more love is given without consequence, the more it becomes a license for taking. A mother or father might forgive repeated disrespect or irresponsibility because their love is unconditional. But this dynamic can breed resentment, burnout, and an erosion of self-respect. The soft heart becomes a doormat, and love's nobility turns into silent suffering. On a larger scale, romantic relationships often fall prey to this blindness. One partner might consistently overlook or excuse harmful behavior because they believe love demands forgiveness and sacrifice. Maybe they tolerate infidelity, emotional neglect, or even abuse because the thought of losing that relationship terrifies them more than the pain caused by staying. Their love becomes a prison, not a sanctuary. They stop protecting their emotional space, lose sight of their worth, and eventually become emotionally depleted. Here, the noble ideal of love at all costs becomes a trap, not a triumph. So why does this happen? Why does love, which should be empowering and uplifting, so often lead to exploitation and pain? The answer lies in human psychology. When we feel love or attachment, our brains release neurochemicals like oxytocin and dopamine, which promote bonding and reward behaviors that encourage closeness. This neurochemical cocktail dulls our critical faculties. It makes us more trusting, more forgiving, and less inclined to perceive threats. It essentially rewires the brain to prioritize connection over caution. At the same time, people are wired to seek security and avoid conflict. We hate the idea of loss or rejection. So when we face situations that challenge our love or force us to set boundaries, we often override our better judgment in favor of emotional comfort. We convince ourselves that things will improve, that our love will heal wounds, that patience will be rewarded. These cognitive biases trap us in cycles where we repeatedly give more than we receive and accept behavior that harms us. Another psychological phenomenon at work is emotional leverage. When someone senses that you're deeply invested emotionally and reluctant to enforce boundaries, they gain power over you. They can manipulate your guilt, your hope, or your fear of abandonment to get what they want. For example, a friend or partner might say, "If you really loved me, you'd forgive me this once," weaponizing love as a means of control. Because you want to maintain the relationship, you may capitulate, even at the expense of your own dignity and needs. This dynamic is insidious because it often occurs under the guise of love and care. The person exploiting your softness might not intend to be malicious. They might simply be acting out of their own survival instinct or emotional immaturity. But the result is the same. Your love is used as currency to extract more from you, leaving you emotionally bankrupt. The tragedy of unconditional love without limits is that it often ends in emotional slavery. Instead of being a source of strength, love becomes a chain that binds you to unhealthy dynamics. It teaches others that your boundaries are malleable and your forgiveness unlimited. You become predictable, and predictability in human relationships often invites exploitation. Understanding this psychological landscape is crucial to breaking free from it. Recognizing that love can blind you is the first step toward reclaiming your clarity and power. It's not about becoming cynical or cold-hearted, but about restoring the mental filters that protect your emotional well-being. This means learning to love with boundaries, to maintain a healthy skepticism, and to keep a strategic awareness of your own needs and limits. For instance, consider the story of someone who repeatedly forgave a partner's infidelity, convinced that love demanded patience and sacrifice. After years of pain and betrayal, they finally drew a firm line, refusing to tolerate such behavior any longer. This boundary didn't mean the end of love, but a recalibration and acknowledgement that love requires respect, trust, and mutual care to survive. By enforcing limits, they regained their dignity and restored balance to the relationship, or if not possible, found the strength to leave. Similarly, in friendships or family ties, learning to say no, to demand accountability, and to withdraw emotional investment when it is not reciprocated are vital skills. They allow love to flourish in environments of respect rather than exploitation. In essence, the blindness of love is a natural but dangerous condition. It stems from deep emotional needs and powerful neurochemical processes that prioritize connection over caution. While this wiring served evolutionary purposes, bonding humans for survival and reproduction, it also makes us vulnerable to exploitation in the complex social webs we navigate today. The antidote is awareness. By understanding how love can cloud judgment and create vulnerability, we empower ourselves to love smarter, not just harder. We learn to balance the heart's yearning for connection with the mind's need for self-protection. This balance transforms love from a potential liability into a source of genuine strength and mutual respect. The people who master this balance are not cold or unfeeling, they are simply wise. They protect their hearts not by building walls, but by erecting gates with guards. They allow only those who prove trustworthy to enter their inner circle. Their love is intentional, selective, and strategic. This does not diminish its power, but enhances its sustainability. When love loses its blindfold, it becomes a tool of empowerment rather than a vector of harm. The softness remains, but it is wrapped in strength. The warmth endures, but it comes with a firm hand. This is the kind of love Machiavelli encourages, not a reckless surrender, but a calculated, self-respecting embrace of connection. This nuanced view challenges cultural myths about love being unconditional and boundless. It asks us to reconsider our assumptions and invites us to redefine what it means to truly love and be loved in a world that is often anything but kind. By shining a light on the dangers of loving blindly and the necessity of boundaries, we open the door to healthier, more resilient relationships. We learn to cherish love not as a weakness, but as a wisely wielded strength. When people hear the term cold-blooded, the image that often comes to mind is someone who is ruthless, unfeeling, and even cruel. Hollywood villains, the icy-hearted characters who show no mercy, this is the stereotype. But to truly understand Machiavelli's concept of being cold-blooded, we have to strip away those cliches and get to the heart of what he actually meant. For Machiavelli, being cold-blooded isn't about cruelty or a lack of empathy. Instead, it's about clear-headedness, strategy, and maintaining control over one's emotions in order to survive and thrive in a world where power dynamics constantly shift. Machiavelli lived in turbulent times, an era of political intrigue, betrayal, and cutthroat competition. His observations about power were forged in this context, where softness could quickly become a fatal flaw. To be cold-blooded, then, means to be aware, measured, and deliberate. It's about understanding when to soften and when to harden, when to show warmth and when to protect your boundaries fiercely. This is a mastery of emotional intelligence that is strategic rather than reactive. It's critical here to distinguish between being cold-blooded and being heartless. Heartlessness implies a total absence of feeling, an emotional void where empathy, compassion, and care have been shut down. Cold-bloodedness, by contrast, is about feeling everything deeply but choosing when and how to act on those feelings. It's emotional discipline, not emotional numbness. The cold-blooded person feels pain, joy, love, and anger, but doesn't let these emotions dictate their every move. Instead, they control their responses, timing their actions for maximum effectiveness rather than immediate satisfaction. Think of a skilled chess player. They may care deeply about the game, about winning, but they don't make impulsive moves based on frustration or excitement. Every move is calculated, strategic, and serves a purpose. This is what Machiavelli meant by cold-bloodedness, acting from a place of power and control rather than blind emotion. In relationships, especially those closest to us, family, friends, partners, this kind of strategic cold-bloodedness is vital. Here, the balance between fear and respect plays a crucial role. Machiavelli famously argued that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. This might sound harsh or even unethical at first, But when we unpack it, the reasoning is surprisingly practical. Love is often fragile. It depends on emotional reciprocity, shared vulnerability, and trust. While it can be powerful, it is also conditional and sometimes fleeting. People who love you may still hurt you, intentionally or not, because love can blind them to their own faults or to the consequences of their actions. Love can be inconsistent because emotions change, priorities shift, and loyalties waver. Fear, on the other hand, breeds a different kind of respect. It's not about terror or abuse, but about the recognition of consequences and boundaries. When people fear losing you or facing your disapproval, they are more likely to think twice before crossing lines or taking you for granted. Fear enforces a kind of discipline in relationships. It demands accountability. And where love might overlook a betrayal, fear will not. To illustrate, consider the workplace. A boss who is merely loved might find employees who take liberties, slack off, or push boundaries because affection alone doesn't enforce rules. But a boss who commands respect mixed with a healthy degree of fear ensures that boundaries are upheld and standards maintained. The same applies in personal relationships. If someone knows you won't tolerate disrespect, that knowledge creates a respectful fear that keeps the relationship balanced. Why is this important in close relationships? Because familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort can easily turn into complacency and entitlement. People get comfortable pushing boundaries when they believe you will always forgive or tolerate them. Machiavelli recognized that fear-respect enforced by the knowledge of consequences is a stronger glue in these dynamics than love alone. This doesn't mean relationships should be cold or hostile. It means that love without boundaries often leads to imbalance and exploitation. When you lead with love alone, you risk becoming predictable and soft. And in Machiavelli's view, predictability is vulnerability. People will test your limits, push your buttons, and if they learn that you will always yield, they will exploit that knowledge. Being cold-blooded, then, is about incorporating a degree of strategic toughness in your relationships. It's knowing when to be warm and generous and when to withdraw, enforce consequences, or even instill a little fear to preserve your dignity and power. This is not about cruelty. It's about safeguarding your emotional center. Consider the story of a woman who always forgave her partner's mistakes without question. Over time, the partner grew complacent, realizing she would never hold him accountable. Eventually, she reached a breaking point, setting firm boundaries and clearly communicating consequences. The partner was initially shocked and resisted, but eventually began to respect her more because he understood that her love came with limits. She was no longer an endless resource to be taken for granted. This is the power of being cold-blooded. It restores balance. It tells people that while you care deeply, you'll not be used or disrespected. You command respect not through intimidation, but through consistency, clarity, and control. Machiavelli's principle that being feared is better than being loved, if you can't have both, isn't a call to tyranny, but an invitation to balance. It's a reminder that love alone is often not enough to protect you or maintain your position. Fear, understood as respect for boundaries and consequences, is a necessary counterpart. In the complex dance of human relationships, this balance ensures survival, dignity, and genuine connection. This idea remains deeply relevant today, where many struggle to assert themselves without fear of being labeled cold or unloving. Machiavelli challenges that cultural narrative by showing that cold-bloodedness is a form of emotional mastery, a tool to navigate the messiness of relationships without losing yourself. It's not about shutting down your heart. It's about arming it with wisdom and strategy. Ultimately, Machiavelli's cold-bloodedness teaches us that emotional intelligence is not softness, but strength to love wisely, to set boundaries firmly, and to command respect, even from those closest to us. In any close relationship, whether with family, friends, or romantic partners, there comes a point where you need to ask yourself, is my love being respected, or is it being exploited? Machiavelli's insights push us to recognize clear signs that reveal when love is no longer a balanced exchange, but a tool others use against us. Understanding these 5 key tests or red flags can save you from emotional depletion and manipulation before it's too late. The first test centers on disproportionate demands and entitlement. It begins subtly. Requests become more frequent, favors less reciprocated. Someone might expect you to drop your plans to accommodate them, or continually lean on your support without considering your boundaries. For example, think about the friend who constantly borrows money without paying it back, expecting you to always be there financially, emotionally, or physically. At first, you might be willing to help because you care, but over time, their demands grow unchecked. They stop acknowledging your sacrifices, stop saying thank you, or even assume you'll say yes automatically. This imbalance of give and take is the first warning sign that your love is being treated as a resource, not a relationship. When someone believes you owe them loyalty or support just because of your closeness, without gratitude or respect, that's entitlement, and it's corrosive. Closely related is the second test: guilt tripping and emotional manipulation. This tactic is often cloaked in vulnerability or hurt feelings, but serves to control your decisions. You set a boundary, like declining a request that crosses your limits, and suddenly you're met with tears, anger, or accusations. If you loved me, you wouldn't say no. These are attempts to weaponize your feelings against you, to bend your will by inducing guilt. For example, a partner might bring up past favors or sacrifices whenever you assert yourself, making you feel selfish or ungrateful. This pattern is toxic because it shifts the power balance. Your emotional responses become the battleground where control is fought. If you find yourself apologizing just to stop the emotional barrage, even when you're right to hold your boundary, that's a red flag. The third test is the one-sided loyalty loop. Loyalty is a cornerstone of any strong relationship, but it loses meaning when it's a one-way street. If you're consistently the person who shows up, supports, and forgives while the other party disappears in times of need or only appears when convenient, you're caught in this loop. Think of a friend who only contacts you when they want something, but vanishes when you need support, or a family member who expects your help but never offers the same. The problem isn't occasional imbalance that's normal, but persistent patterns where your loyalty becomes expected, unappreciated, and unreciprocated. This breeds resentment and drains your emotional bank account. The fourth test is the classic just this once trap, which gradually erodes your boundaries. It starts with small requests that feel reasonable: a last-minute favor, an overlooked mistake, a skipped commitment. You agree, thinking it's a one-time deal. But just this once becomes a habit, and your limits get chipped away piece by piece. Over time, you realize you're bending more and more, losing sight of your values and needs. This slow erosion is dangerous because it's gradual and disguised as flexibility or generosity. For instance, an employee might repeatedly ask to leave early or skip tasks, just this once. And the boss who always says yes eventually sees their authority undermined. In relationships, this pattern weakens your stand and signals to others that your boundaries aren't firm. Finally, the fifth test is being labeled too cold or too harsh when you start enforcing boundaries or pulling back. This is a classic tactic used to shame you into compliance. The moment you stop being the endlessly patient, forgiving, and available person, people accuse you of losing warmth or becoming distant. They paint your necessary self-protection as cruelty or emotional withdrawal. Imagine a friend who calls you heartless after you stop covering for their bad behavior, or a partner who says you've changed because you no longer tolerate disrespect. This accusation is a manipulation designed to guilt trip you back into old patterns. It's a sign that your enforced boundaries are effective because they disrupt the exploitative dynamic, and that those around you preferred the version of you who let things slide. These 5 tests serve as essential checkpoints to evaluate the health of your relationships. They aren't meant to encourage paranoia, but to cultivate awareness. Love should never require sacrificing your dignity, consistency, or well-being. When these signs appear, it's crucial to reflect and decide whether the relationship is balanced or whether it demands recalibration. Understanding these dynamics also helps dismantle the misconception that setting boundaries makes you cold or unloving. On the contrary, boundaries are acts of self-respect and emotional intelligence. They prevent exploitation and foster healthier, more sustainable connections. Those who truly care will recognize and respect your limits. Those who don't are revealing their true colors. In real life, many people experience these patterns without naming them. Take the story of someone who always prioritized their friends' needs, but was never invited to important events or supported during their crises. Over time, this friend expected constant help, but gave little in return. When finally confronted, the friend accused them of being selfish and uncaring. This is the fifth test in action, the shift from being warm and giving to cold and selfish the moment you enforce boundaries. Similarly, a partner who consistently pushes your emotional limits and then labels you too sensitive or harsh is testing how far they can manipulate you. Recognizing these patterns empowers you to respond with clarity rather than guilt. In summary, these 5 tests expose the fine line between love and exploitation. They remind us that love without boundaries is not generosity, it's vulnerability to manipulation. True love involves mutual respect, reciprocity, and accountability. When these are absent, and the tests are repeatedly failed, it's a sign to reconsider and rebuild your emotional landscape with clear, firm boundaries. By staying vigilant against entitlement, emotional manipulation, one-sided loyalty, incremental boundary erosion, and unfair labeling, you safeguard your heart and dignity. Machiavelli's teachings encourage embracing this form of strategic love, not coldness in the cruel sense, but cold-blooded clarity that protects you from being used and honors your value. Building firm boundaries is one of the most essential and powerful strategies you can employ to protect your heart and preserve your dignity in relationships. Machiavelli understood that emotional softness without limits is a vulnerability, so his approach encourages us to develop a framework of unshakable boundaries grounded in clarity, consistency, and self-respect. This means that you don't just casually set limits, you enforce them with precision and without hesitation. Creating a space where your emotional well-being is safeguarded and your relationships are defined by mutual respect rather than exploitation. One of the foundational principles in this strategy is the refusal to over-explain your coldness or distance. Too often, people feel compelled to justify why they are pulling back or setting limits. They launch into long explanations, apologies, or rationalizations, hoping to soften the blow or gain approval. But Machiavelli's insight warns us that explaining your emotional boundaries invites negotiation and, ultimately, weakness. When you feel the need to defend your detachment, you give others the opportunity to debate, question, and push back against your limits. It signals that your boundaries might be flexible, which immediately diminishes their power. Imagine telling someone, "I'm upset because you did this, and I need space to think it over." If you stop there, you've stated your boundary clearly. But if you add, "I hope you understand, and I don't want to hurt you," you've already opened the door to debate and emotional persuasion. This is the precise moment when your cold-blooded strategy falters. People can challenge your why, exploit your empathy, and try to wear you down. Instead, the most effective approach is simple. Declare your boundary firmly and act on it without apology or explanation. The clarity of action commands respect because it shows that you are in control, not begging for validation. Next, it's vital to set clear consequences, not conditions. Many people approach boundaries with phrases like, "If you do this, I'll be upset," or "Please don't do that, it hurts me." These statements sound reasonable, but actually put your limits on shaky ground. They are requests rather than mandates and rely on others' goodwill or cooperation to hold up. Machiavelli's advice is stronger. You don't ask or hope for better behavior. You demonstrate the consequences when boundaries are crossed. For instance, instead of saying, If you disrespect me, I'll be hurt. Say, disrespect means I withdraw my presence, and then follow through decisively. This is a non-negotiable outcome, not a conditional plea. When consequences are explicit and enforced without wavering, they build an internal structure of power around your emotions. People learn that crossing your line results in real change or distance, silence, or withdrawal. And because these are actions rather than words, they communicate seriousness more effectively than any explanation ever could. This approach creates a feedback loop that discourages exploitation. When people know you're serious, they're less likely to test your limits repeatedly. A crucial part of this discipline is the refusal to negotiate through emotion. Emotional bargaining is a common tactic in manipulative dynamics. Someone might cry, guilt trip, or get angry to pressure you into retracting a boundary or making an exception. Machiavelli understood that giving in to emotional negotiation is tantamount to surrendering your power. If you bend each time feelings are weaponized against you, you teach others that your limits are malleable and easily swayed. Think of it this way. Your emotions are your currency, and negotiators try to spend it to buy access or concessions. If you allow this, you're essentially funding your own exploitation. The cold-blooded strategy demands that you maintain an emotional shield calm, composed, and unreadable. When emotions run high around your boundaries, do not engage in back-and-forth debates or apologies. Instead, hold your stance firmly. Your silence becomes your strength. Your refusal to respond emotionally becomes your leverage. Consistency is the lifeblood of firm boundaries. Your limits must be clear and unwavering. Changing your boundaries based on who is asking, your mood, or how tired you feel signals weakness. People quickly detect this flexibility and will test it relentlessly. For example, if you say one day you won't tolerate lateness, but let it slide the next, you're teaching people that your standards aren't serious. This invites disrespect and pushes your limits further. Machiavelli's model requires black and white rules. For example, I do not respond to disrespectful communication. If it happens, I remove myself from the conversation. And then you enforce this every single time without exception. When you break your own rules, you undermine your authority and give away your power. On the contrary, when you consistently apply your boundaries, you create a psychological framework that others must respect to maintain a connection with you. A common fear that holds people back from enforcing these firm boundaries is the concern of being perceived as cold, harsh, or rigid. Society often equates kindness with softness and firmness with cruelty. But Machiavelli's perspective flips this notion on its head. Being called cold or inflexible is a sign that you're no longer allowing yourself to be exploited. It means you've stepped out of the role of the perpetual giver and into that of the self-respecting individual. When you're labeled too cold for standing your ground, it's not a condemnation, but an acknowledgement that you've shifted the power dynamic. Those who benefited from your previous softness will resist your evolution because it threatens their advantage. It's essential not to internalize these accusations or let them deter you. Their discomfort is not your problem. It is simply the sound of others mourning the loss of the version of you that was easy to use. Fear of losing relationships or being seen as uncaring often leads people to lower their standards or retract boundaries prematurely. Machiavelli's counsel is clear. Preserve your limits, even if it means losing people who cannot respect them. Relationships that require you to sacrifice your boundaries are not sustainable and ultimately harmful. For instance, someone who constantly tolerates disrespectful behavior from a partner to avoid conflict might be called too sensitive or unreasonable when they finally say no. Instead of retreating, holding firm sends a message that you value yourself and will not settle for less. Over time, this approach commands genuine respect, even if it initially sparks discomfort or resistance. Another real-world example can be seen in professional settings. A manager who lets employees walk over deadlines or disrespect policies may be liked, but will lose authority quickly. By contrast, a manager who enforces rules consistently, even if perceived as tough, earns long-term respect and maintains a functional environment. The same principle applies in personal relationships. Firmness protects your heart and maintains your position. Ultimately, building firm boundaries the Machiavellian way means refusing to explain or justify your coldness, clearly stating and enforcing consequences without negotiation, remaining consistent without wavering, and disregarding fear of negative judgment. It's a strategy grounded in self-respect and psychological savvy, allowing you to love without losing yourself and to connect without being consumed. This disciplined approach to emotional boundaries doesn't strip away your warmth or compassion. Instead, it channels those qualities through a lens of strength and clarity, ensuring that your love is given to those who earn it and that your heart remains protected from unnecessary harm. There's a certain raw truth in real-life stories that theory alone can't capture, stories that reveal how loving without limits often leads not to joy, but to pain and depletion. Take the story of Sarah, a woman who, like many of us, believed in loving unconditionally. Sarah was the kind of person who gave endlessly to her family, friends, and partner. She forgave quickly, excused behavior that hurt her, and always put others' needs before her own. Over time, this generosity became a double-edged sword. Her family began to take her kindness for granted, asking more and more without giving back. Her partner grew complacent, knowing Sarah would never walk away no matter how often he disappointed her. Friends relied on her emotional labor, but rarely checked in during her dark moments. Despite her efforts, Sarah found herself exhausted, resentful, and emotionally bankrupt. Sarah's story isn't unique. It's a familiar pattern for many who love without boundaries. Loving without limits can feel noble and selfless, but the reality is often starkly different. Without clear boundaries, love becomes a license for others to exploit, eroding your sense of self and leaving you vulnerable to repeated hurt. What Sarah lacked was not love, but the strategic awareness that Machiavelli champions, the recognition that love must be balanced with self-preservation and clear limits. Contrast Sarah's experience with that of Michael, a friend who struggled with similar issues but chose a different path inspired by Machiavellian principles. Michael was once a classic people pleaser. He always said yes, even when it cost him time, energy, and peace of mind. After years of being taken for granted, he decided to rethink his approach to relationships. He started setting firm boundaries, making clear what behavior he would no longer tolerate. He refused to over-explain his decisions or justify his need for space. When someone crossed the line, he enforced consequences quietly but consistently, whether that meant stepping back emotionally or limiting access to his time. The transformation in Michael's life was profound. Not only did his relationships become healthier, but his self-respect and confidence soared. People around him began to treat him differently, respecting his limits, valuing his presence more, and investing in the relationship in return. He wasn't less loving. He was simply more strategic, more controlled in how he gave. His love carried weight because it was not given out indiscriminately, but earned and sustained with intentionality. This shift didn't happen overnight or without discomfort. Michael faced resistance. Friends accused him of being cold. A partner struggled with a new dynamic, but he held firm. The key lesson he learned was that true strength lies in consistency and clarity, not in endless yielding. By loving with boundaries, Michael reclaimed his power and created relationships that honored both his heart and his mind. These stories underscore an essential lesson. Love without strategy can be self-destructive, but love with strategic boundaries is empowering. It's not about building walls or shutting off emotion. It's about building gates with guards who decide who gets in and under what terms. It's about being generous yet discerning, warm yet firm. This approach aligns with a principle I've seen echoed in countless personal experiences. Those who master the art of selective love maintain control over their emotional lives and their relationships. They don't suffer in silence or allow exploitation. Instead, They choose carefully where to invest their love and energy. This selectiveness is not selfishness, but a form of self-command that fosters respect and reciprocity. The core of Machiavelli's insight here is that emotional power is not about how much you give, but how wisely you give. It's about understanding that love is a resource precious and limited, and that giving it without thought can leave you drained and vulnerable. The balance is in loving fully, but conditionally, where love is offered not as a guarantee, but as a privilege earned through respect and consistency. In my own experience, and those of many others, adopting this mindset has been transformative. People who once felt overwhelmed and unappreciated find new strength and peace when they begin to enforce boundaries. They discover that saying no or stepping back doesn't diminish their capacity to love. Rather, it enhances it by preserving their emotional health. Relationships shift from being sources of stress and pain to spaces of mutual growth and support. Moreover, living with strategic love invites a deeper form of connection. When love is given deliberately, with awareness of boundaries and consequences, it gains authenticity and power. Those who receive it understand its value and are more likely to honor it. This dynamic fosters healthier communication, clearer expectations, and stronger bonds. To sum it up, the lesson from real life is clear. Loving without limits often leads to being used and hurt. But loving with strategy, boundaries, and self-respect creates resilience and dignity. Machiavelli's teachings, though born in a harsh political context, offer timeless wisdom for navigating the complex landscape of human relationships. They remind us that love and power are not enemies, but partners when balanced thoughtfully. They empower us to protect our hearts while connecting deeply with others. If you look around, you'll see these dynamics playing out everywhere from families to workplaces to friendships. The challenge and the gift lie in learning how to love strategically, to give fully but wisely, to hold firm boundaries, and to maintain control of your emotional world. This is not coldness, it is clarity. Not detachment, it is command. And in mastering this balance, you find a love that is not only sustainable, but profoundly empowering. Practicing what might be called cold-blooded love in modern life doesn't mean turning off your emotions or becoming unfeeling. Instead, it's about mastering the art of loving with clear boundaries, emotional discipline, and strategic warmth. In today's world, where relationships are more complex and emotionally charged than ever, knowing how to build and maintain these boundaries can mean the difference between healthy connection and emotional exhaustion. The first step in practicing this kind of love is learning how to build emotional boundaries deliberately. This doesn't mean shutting people out or becoming distant by default. Rather, it involves defining what behaviors and emotional demands you will accept and which ones you won't. For instance, you might decide that you won't tolerate disrespectful communication, constant criticism, or emotional manipulation. Setting these limits clearly both in your own mind and in your interactions is crucial. It often helps to articulate these boundaries, either verbally or in your own reflections, so you're clear on where your limits lie. Saying something like, "I need space when I'm upset, and I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk," sets a clear expectation that respects both your needs and the relationship's integrity. Maintaining emotional stillness is the second critical element. When someone triggers you emotionally, especially in close relationships, the natural impulse is to react immediately, defend, explain, or lash out. Cold-blooded love requires resisting this urge. Instead, practice pausing, taking a breath, and observing your emotions without acting on them impulsively. This emotional detachment isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about not letting them control your behavior. For example, if a partner says something hurtful, instead of reacting instantly with anger or hurt, take a moment to consider whether the comment requires a response or if it's better to wait until you're calm. This pause can prevent unnecessary escalation and keeps you in control of your emotional narrative. Another key practice is consistency and discipline in upholding your boundaries. It's easy to say, "I won't tolerate this," but much harder to enforce it, especially when emotions run high or when you fear losing someone. Machiavellian cold-blooded love means being unwavering. If a boundary is crossed, follow through with the consequence you've set, whether that's taking space, withdrawing emotional energy, or ending the conversation. This consistency builds trust in yourself and communicates to others that your limits are not negotiable. It also strengthens your internal sense of power and control, making it less likely you'll be manipulated or taken for granted. However, this approach doesn't mean becoming cold or unkind. A common misconception is that setting firm boundaries requires sacrificing warmth or humanity. On the contrary, true cold-blooded love is about managing your warmth strategically. You remain compassionate, empathetic, and caring, but on your terms and within your limits. You choose when and how to express your care, ensuring it's genuine and sustainable. This controlled warmth prevents emotional burnout and preserves your ability to give deeply without being depleted. For instance, you might show empathy and support when you're emotionally available, but also recognize when you need to recharge and protect your energy. In practical terms, this could look like a parent who listens attentively and supports their child's growth, but also enforces rules and expectations without guilt. Or a friend who offers encouragement and presence, but knows when to step back from drama or emotional dumping. It's about balancing presence and distance, care and self-preservation. One useful technique is to develop emotional checkpoints, moments of self-reflection where you assess how a relationship or interaction affects your well-being. Ask yourself, am I feeling drained or energized after this conversation? Is this boundary being respected? Do I feel valued? Regularly checking in helps you recalibrate your boundaries and responses, ensuring you don't fall into old patterns of overgiving or emotional reactivity. Another powerful tool is to cultivate a support system that respects and reinforces your boundaries. Surround yourself with people who honor your limits and model healthy emotional behavior. This creates a positive feedback loop where your cold-blooded love isn't an isolating stance, but part of a network of mutual respect and care. Also, developing self-awareness around your triggers is vital. Knowing what kinds of situations or behaviors push your buttons allows you to prepare mentally and emotionally, reducing the chance of being caught off guard. For example, if you recognize that certain phrases or tones provoke you, you can consciously choose not to engage immediately or to steer the conversation differently. Maintaining cold-blooded love in modern life also requires patience and practice. It's a skill developed over time, not an instant transformation. You will encounter setbacks and moments where emotions overwhelm your strategy. The key is to learn from these moments without judgment and recommit to your boundaries and emotional discipline. Finally, it's important to remember that cold-blooded love is a form of emotional intelligence, not emotional suppression. It allows you to be fully present and connected without losing yourself. You can love fiercely and deeply while also loving wisely. The balance between warmth and distance, vulnerability and control, generosity and self-protection is what makes this form of love sustainable and powerful. In essence, practicing cold-blooded love today means being intentional with your emotional energy. It means knowing when to open your heart and when to shield it. It means communicating your needs clearly, standing firm in your boundaries, and managing your emotional reactions with calm and clarity. Through these practices, you not only protect yourself, but also foster healthier, more respectful, and more authentic relationships in every area of your life. Love, when stripped to its raw essentials, is as much about survival as it is about connection. The key takeaway from Machiavelli's philosophy is clear. Love without boundaries is not love at all. It is vulnerability waiting to be exploited. To thrive emotionally, we must embrace the necessity of limits, understanding that emotional power is the cornerstone of self-preservation. This power doesn't come from shutting off the heart, but from mastering it, from controlling where and how we invest our deepest feelings. Machiavelli challenges the common misconception that to be cold-blooded is to be cruel or heartless. On the contrary, cold-bloodedness is an expression of intelligence and freedom. It is the wisdom to protect yourself without sacrificing your capacity to care, to love without losing yourself in the process. Being strategic in love is a form of liberation. It frees you from the chains of emotional servitude, where endless giving and unconditional forgiveness often lead to personal ruin. This kind of calculated warmth allows you to remain open and compassionate while maintaining the power to enforce your boundaries and expectations. To live by this philosophy means rethinking your entire approach to relationships. It calls for courage to set clear limits and the discipline to enforce them consistently. It requires emotional maturity to resist manipulation and the clarity to recognize when love is being weaponized against you. This mindset transforms love from a source of weakness into a wellspring of strength, empowering you to engage with others authentically, but without compromise to your self-worth. The ultimate advice is to love wisely and protect fiercely. Don't be afraid to be labeled cold or distant when you're simply being discerning and self-respecting. The discomfort that arises from change is natural, but it's also a sign of growth. Surround yourself with those who respect your boundaries, and let go of those who don't. Your emotional energy is precious. Invest it where it's valued, not squandered. Now, take a moment to reflect. Are you ready to love with strength? To open your heart without losing your power? To embrace the complexity of relationships with strategic empathy and unwavering boundaries? This is the path Machiavelli points to, a path where love is not a liability, but a deliberate, powerful choice. The question remains, are you prepared to walk it? Thank you so much for watching all the way through. If this video resonated with you, hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach people who need to hear this message. Don't forget to share it with friends, family, or anyone caught in the endless cycle of loving too much and getting hurt. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more eye-opening content like this that cuts straight to the core of how we relate to each other and to ourselves. Also, if you want to support the channel and help me continue making videos that dive deep into topics like emotional intelligence, personal power, and relationship mastery, please consider leaving a super thanks or donating. Your support fuels this community and helps keep this channel thriving. Before we wrap up, let's recap the big takeaways. Love, as Machiavelli reminds us, is not just a warm, fuzzy feeling or an unconditional gift. It's a complex dynamic that requires boundaries, awareness, and sometimes, yes, strategic coldness. Being cold-blooded isn't about losing your heart or becoming cruel. It's about protecting your heart with clarity and control so you don't lose yourself in the process of loving others. This balance between warmth and toughness is what allows you to give deeply without being depleted, to stay open without being exploited, and to command respect without fear or intimidation. It's a shift from being emotionally reactive to being emotionally strategic. And while this may feel uncomfortable at first, especially when people accuse you of being cold or distant, it's the freedom to love on your own terms. Remember, your emotional energy is precious. You don't owe anyone unconditional access to it, especially if it costs your peace and dignity. By adopting the mindset Machiavelli teaches, you reclaim your power and transform your relationships into spaces of mutual respect and genuine connection. Now I want you to think, are you ready to love fiercely but wisely? To protect your heart while staying open? To hold firm boundaries without guilt? This isn't just a theory, it's a lifestyle, and it begins with the choices you make today. If you found value here, please do like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment below. What's one boundary you're going to start setting? How do you plan to bring this cold-blooded clarity into your life? I read every comment and love hearing from this community. And if you want to support this channel further, consider using the super thanks or donate feature. Your generosity helps keep this conversation alive and growing. Thanks again for being here. Stay strong, stay strategic, And as always, keep mastering the art of loving without losing yourself.